Hello, and welcome to today's review of Fafnir Forge's brand new Mainz Gladius, available on Cult of Athena. So this was gifted to me by Cult of Athena recently, and I am absolutely in love with this sword. Before I talk about it a little bit, what I think of it, some of the history around it, everything, just to go over the specs real quick, it is available on Cult of Athena right now for $288. Amazing price for a blade like this, if you ask me. I have seen ones comparable for 2-3 times the price. For the price range, this is probably one of the best ones I've seen there. The blade comes out to a little over 20 inches, 20 3/16, I believe, and just over 1.5 pounds at 1 pound 9 ounces. So for all y'all metric folks, that is a little over 2/3 of a kilo, and I am not going to do the conversion for the blade length off the top of my head into centimeters, because I'm not as good at that one. Now, right off the bat, before you even take this thing out of the scabbard, you can see that this is a soldier's Gladius. This is your everyday Legionary's Gladius. This is not some super fancy ornate thing that you would see a general or an emperor or anyone like that carrying around. Just looking at the scabbard, well, yes, the scabbard is absolutely lovely. Gorgeous red dye on it, great brass fittings on it. It's not super ornate, doesn't have tons of really intricate detail work, anything like that. It is just the basics for getting the job done. And you look at the hilt itself, the whole thing, absolutely gorgeous, fits wonderfully in the hand, but the entire thing is wood. You don't have any bone, you don't have any fancy inlays, inscriptions, anything like that, just a nice, sturdy wood grip. So this thing was made for your average, everyday soldier. Nothing fancy, nothing showy, gets the job done, works great. Now, like I said, with the sword itself, one of the very first impressions I had pulling out of the box was just how wonderfully this thing fits in the hand. As you can see, really no extra room in there for the hand to wiggle around between the crossguard and the pommel, just right on there. Fingers fit perfectly into those grooves. This is one of the best grips I have found on a Gladius, especially for comparable prices. Now, pulling it out of the scabbard, and there is a little bit of friction there. One thing that I did really love about this with pulling it out of the scabbard is it's not super loose. If I shake it, yeah, it'll fall out, but it's not just going to fall out on its own, which compared to the other Fafnir blade that I've got is great. I've also got their 8th, 9th century Viking sword, and you tilt that thing forward a little bit too much and the blade falls right down. This one, not the case. So, a little bit more about this blade. As you can see, it's got that gorgeous wasp-waisted shape that you find typically with the Mainz Gladius. One of the most even ones that I've seen for the price range. A lot of the similarly priced ones that you're going to be looking at are going to be your Deepika, your Windlass, etc., which are not bad blades for the most part. With these ones, they're perfectly good for their price point, but they're not, the craftsmanship on them isn't quite as good. It's more uneven, it's typically heavier, clunkier, and for a blade this size, with this coming out to just over 1.5 pounds, that is exactly where you want it to be at. Now, the one thing I will say about the blade is there is just the tiniest bit of a wiggle in there. Don't know how much it's visible on the camera there, but there is a little tiny bit of wiggle. Now, it wasn't there when I pulled it right out of the packaging, so I'm guessing that it just is going to come down to the air pressure, humidity, temperature, whatever differentials from where I am, where I pulled it out of the packaging, and where it was coming from. Had a similar thing with the other Fafnir blade that I've got, again the 8th, 9th century Viking blade, where I pulled it out of the packaging, it looked great, and then 6-7 hours later the pommel had some rusting on it. Was able to take care of that rusting without a problem. Haven't had any issues with that since, but the issue did pop up about 6-7 hours later, which is the same thing that I saw with this. Blade was almost entirely straight when I pulled it out of the packaging. 6-7 hours later, a little bit of a wiggle in there. I did manage to get most of it out just by bending it back. Haven't seen it pop up, but there is that little bit of a wiggle there that I'm going to have to live with. Now, I'm not doing any cutting tests with this. I'm not doing any sort of cutting, thrusting, anything with this. So at the end of the day, it having that little bit of a wiggle in there is not the end of the world. I use all my blades for show purposes, for reenactment cosplay, for cosplay in general, photo shoots, videos, all that sort of fun stuff, Ren fairs. So I don't need something that is going to be 100% the most functional piece in the world, just something that's going to look good, and this looks pretty darn good. Now, one thing that also really impressed me with this one, which you don't see on a lot of the less expensive Gladii, is you've got that brass inlay inside the pommel. Now that is what you would find historically with these Gladii. A lot of times when you look at the cheaper models of Gladius that you'll find on the market, you'll find that they either have a solid ring across the top as that brass piece, or they're just lacking it entirely. I have not found that many others that actually have that really, really beautiful inlay in there. And as you can see looking at it, there's not too much extra spacing in there. There is a little tiny bit, but it's not too much, and quite honestly, when you look at the amount of spacing that there is there, that is not too far outside of what you would reasonably expect there to be on an actual historical piece. And at the end of the day, I'm going to pick something that is imperfect over something that looks like it was made in a computer. When you look at actual historical pieces, there were imperfections, there were inconsistencies, there were little pieces that just didn't line up quite perfectly, because we were not machining everything 2,000 years ago when these Mainz Gladius were made. We were hand making everything. Everything was made by individual craftsmen, and so everything was not perfect. Everything did not line up 100%. So I am okay with that little bit of gapping, with those little tiny inconsistencies, like that little tiny bit of a wiggle in that blade. Now, this is an absolutely beautiful piece, and the Mainz Gladius is probably, if not definitely, the most famous model of Gladius, the most popular one at the very least that you will see. You turn on your movies, your TV shows, the Mainz pattern Gladius is what you are going to see 99% of the time, which I think is a little bit funny considering the fact that out of the three main Gladius patterns, it was around for the least time. You had your Hispaniensis, which was the original Gladius, which was around for a few hundred years, and then after the Mainz pattern, you had the Pompeii model, which was again around for a few hundred years. The Mainz was really only at the very early days of the Empire, coming around towards the very end of the 1st century BC, and falling out of favor by the end of the 1st century AD at the latest. Pompeii, the Pompeii type popped up a little bit before then. So really you're seeing this model in use for maybe 100 years tops. But it's during one of Rome's most famous eras, which is probably a big part of why you see it so much, especially when you look at the fact that so many of the reenactment groups do focus on that 1st century AD legionary look. Now, overall, I talked about how this looks, I talked a little bit about the history of this thing, how this thing feels. Like I said, the grip is perfect. It feels so comfortable in the hand. The wood is comfortable, the varnish isn't going to give me blisters, it's not going to give me splinters anywhere because it is sealed and it fits perfectly into that hand. It is comfortable. I can twirl it around without it hitting anywhere. Probably not going to do that if you're an actual legionary, useless, but it looks cool. And it's perfectly comfortable. And as far as the balance of this thing goes, yes, it is a little bit heavier towards the tip. It does want to come down with you. But Gladii were front-heavy swords. A lot of people will talk about how they were a thrusting weapon. They were not. They were an everything weapon, and they are fantastic hackers, fantastic slashers, and this thing really has that. Now, it's not as front heavy as some later swords that you'll see, like some of your earlier Viking swords, some of your migration era swords, those ones where you have a lot more length there, a lot more weight forward of the handle. But the weight does sit a few inches forward. It does want to come down with you. But because it's not too long a blade, and because it is only just over 1.5 pounds, it is totally manageable. It's not going to fight you when you try and bring it back up. You can swing it around all day long, which if you're in the front lines at Teutoburg, you want to swing it around all day long. This thing is absolutely brilliant. The blade is not hollow ground. Not going to complain about that. There is debate as to whether or not these were hollow ground historically. You will find examples that were and examples that were not, more that were not. As you can see, it's not completely even. It's a little bit of a different angle on both sides, but at the end of the day, again, those little tiny imperfections, we're not going to complain about that here. I do not mind a little bit of imperfection for the sake of historical authenticity. Personally, it also helps me feel a lot more comfortable knowing which side I'm going to have as the strong edge and which side as the weak edge. Just personal preferences though. Now, on top of that, you've also got that Fafnir Forge inscription there, which is absolutely beautiful. I love that it is hand inscribed. It is not just some laser etch that'll come out with some mild wear and tear. It is inscribed into there. You can feel it with your finger. Now, talked a lot about the sword there, talked a little bit about the scabbard, and talk a little bit more about that scabbard. Now, like I mentioned, gorgeous dye job on here, very, very consistent. I've got swords myself that are 3-4 times the price with dye jobs on their scabbards that were way more consistent. The brass fittings are nice, they're simple, but they're solid. A little tiny bit of patina that's popped up over the last few days since I got it. Patina on brass is not something I'm going to complain about. I will get rust off of steel. I'm not going to worry too much about some patina on brass. I like how it looks. The fittings are tight for the most part. There really isn't too much gapping there, too much dead space. Little tiny bit with the shape down here, but not to the point where it's going to cause issues, where it's going to come loose, where it's going to look bad. It's just one of those things where if you're looking really closely at it, you will see it. And the rings to connect this thing to a belt or a baldric are a perfect size. They are nice, sturdy rings, unlike many other Gladii that I've seen for similar price points, so I'm not worried about these things popping off. I'm not worried about them having difficulty hooking up to the baldric that I am in the process of making for this thing. I'm not worried about this scabbard one bit. It is a wood core with leather wrapping and those brass fittings. Love this scabbard. Nice and simple. We love simple here. I am not doing any cosplays or reenactments for fancy generals, anything like that. I am doing for your standard everyday legionary, for your standard everyday soldier, the guy that you are going to see just as another faceless member of the Imperial Legion. Now, only other things with the blade that I am going to talk about real quick. If you are a stickler for absolute perfection, there are some hammer marks on the blade that are visible. You can see the little ripples there. Personally, I love those. If you don't want them, save up to get an Albion where it is completely ground to shape, but I like that hammered look. The pommel, the peen on that tang is not perfect, but it does look pretty darn good. And it is perfectly solid. It does not look like it is coming loose at all. There are really no major imperfections in that wood, no spacings of any sort, no chipping, no cracks, anything like that. Perfect, love it. Overall, This is one of the best, if not the best, Gladii that I have found for a similar price point, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who is remotely interested in getting themselves a Mainz pattern Gladius, or really any other early Imperial model of Roman sword. Like I said, this thing is available right now for $288 on Cult of Athena, which would be worth every single penny, in my opinion. Definitely check it out. You can check out the link in my bio where you can find a link directly to it. I wouldn't be putting it in my link there if I didn't truly believe that this was a wonderful sword. I am in love with it. Thank you again, Cult of Athena, for sending me this blade. It has been an absolute pleasure to review, to look at, to add to my collection, and I am very, very excited to do more with this, to show it off for you guys more in the future, in plenty of stuff that I've got planned and that I've got coming up. So, everyone, have a great day. Check out the new Fafnir Forge Mainz Gladius, and stay sharp.